Good morning, everybody. Used to seeing Professor James O'Rourke here this morning. He's out of town. My name is Jeff Bergster. And I'm the Associate Dean for Graduate Business Programs here at Mendoza. So thank you for coming this morning, as well as participating in 10 Years Hence. Especially this semester where we're focusing on impact investing. We're very honored today to have our guest here, Dr. Mirza Jahani. Dr. Jahani is Chief Executive Officer of Aga Khan Foundation USA. Since joining AKF USA in November of 2009, Mirza has focused on widening and deepening partnerships with U.S.-based organizations, strengthening support to Aga Khan Development Network's civil society development portfolio, and promoting impact investments for AKDN projects in Africa and Asia as a way to boost development resources and foster public-private partnerships. Before that, he served for 15 years as CEO of the Aga Khan Foundation in the United Kingdom, East Africa, and Tajikistan, helping to conceptualize, implement, and secure funding for programs in rural development, health, education, and civil society, often in post-conflict environments. Mirza began his career in the early 1980s as an economist with the United Kingdom's Department for International Development. He served with the DFID again from 2004 to 2009 as Senior Governance Advisor in the Middle East, Central Asia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. He's also been an economic advisor to an African government. Mirza was born in Uganda and educated at London, Harvard, and Cambridge universities, where he earned his doctorate in 2009. He and his wife, Nazira, have 2 children. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mirza Jahani.
Well, the person who said whoa gets my vote already. Thank you. I'm going to start this lecture by asking you some questions, which may be a bit unusual, because I know all of you have come to learn from me. So please bear with me, because I will give you some of my thoughts on these questions towards the end of my presentation. But because the title of the lecture series is 10 Years Hence, I wanted to just get a show of hands from all of you about how many of you think that the world will be a safer place in 10 years' time? Show of hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6. So we'll make a little note of that number. And how many of you, second question, how many of you think that the world will be a more equitable place? So we have a similar sort of number. And now a little micro question, and I'll then move on. How many of you think that the interest rates will be higher in 10 years' time? All right. Good. I would say almost half of you think that's the case. So I'm already have a sense of the leanings of this group. Pessimistic, money-orientated, business-minded, and hopefully savers, because you all think interest rates are going to rise, okay? That's a great way to start. I want to spend a few minutes, and we'll come back to these questions, because I think that you will want to know how I answer those questions, I hope. And if I don't, you shouldn't let me get out of this room. I think that I will spend a few minutes just talking about the Aga Khan Development Network. Again, a show of hands, please. How many of you know or ever heard of the Aga Khan Development Network? Okay, good. So I'm going to have to earn my living today. The Aga Khan Development Network is a network established and founded by His Highness the Aga Khan. He's the leader of the Shia Imami Muslims. There are some 20 million Muslims around the world that profess the faith of Shia Ismailis. Shia and Sunni is a very important dynamic in Islam. Uh, Another question, how many of you would be able to tell me the difference between Shia and Sunni? All right. So the origins of the Shia and Sunni division are after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, when the community had two major interpretations of what the Prophet wanted. One part of the community said that the Prophet had left behind a successor, and there was an inheritance that went with that. And the Shia community, the community of Ali, believed that Ali was the successor. The Sunni community believed that the last revelation was the Quran, and that the interpretation of the Quran was to be given to learned scholars. And so that community split around 50% at that time. And it's important to know that division from that perspective, because in today's world, a lot of the tension is surrounded because of that difference. And the Shias believe that the interpretation of the faith has to be led by an imam, and His Highness the Aga Khan is, we believe, the 49th imam of the Shia Ismaili Muslims in direct descent of the Prophet Muhammad. And His Highness the Aga Khan has created the Aga Khan Development Network, which comprises of institutions on both for-profit and not-for-profit. In the economic development arena, we run institutions and firms as diverse as airlines, banks, insurance companies, hotels, hydropower stations, agro-processing companies across some 15 countries of Africa and Asia. Then there's a social development arm, which is in health, education, universities. The Aga Khan Foundation that I lead here in the US falls within that arena. And then we have the cultural arm that is about looking at preservation of historic buildings, development of city parks, awards for architecture that are looking at modern techniques of Islamic architecture. These three arms evolved over a period of about 50 years as His Highness's imamate became stronger and more mature. But the fascinating thing that's been happening across the last 10 or 15 years is to look at the way in which we can integrate the approaches of these different institutions to accelerate the process of development in the countries where we operate. The Aga Khan Development Network is primarily a network that operates in Africa and Asia. We do have offices like in America and in the UK and in Geneva and in Switzerland, but our primary focus of our work is in Africa and Asia. And much more fundamentally, many of the countries where we work are what you would categorize as fragile states: Pakistan, Afghanistan, Democratic Republic of Congo. Kenya, from time to time, has been fragile. Syria definitely is now. So that gives you a sort of a sense of the sort of geography where we operate. And in most of the geographies, the institutions that I highlighted to you a minute ago can be found. So that's just a little bit of a background, and I'm happy to talk to you a little bit more about that if you like. But I know that you're all interested in impact investment, and I wanted to make sure that we get onto that subject. Given the set of institutions that the Aga Khan Network has, it gives us a unique opportunity to be able to integrate that development process so that the social endeavor that we are trying to bring about, the improvement in the quality of life that we're trying to bring about, can have a maximum potential. And what we've now understood is that we probably have 4 types of investment approaches that we can actually undertake. And before I explain those 4 approaches to you, I should tell you a little bit about why it is that impact investment has become such an important concept for us. The major reason is that the social development work that we used to do in the past was supported by His Highness's, the Aga Khan's grants or philanthropic dollars, that we were able to join hands with the likes of U.S.A. or DFID or the European Union to get grant financing for the social development work that we wanted to do. But increasingly, that type of grant financing is shrinking. When I started in the development business about 30 years ago, 80% of the investment of the flows, private flows, that were going to Africa and Asia were what we would know as official assistance. And 20% was private flows through commercial banks or private investors. Today, that statistic has flipped. That's the only thing that you take away from today. I'll be very happy. It is much more about private sector investment that's the engine of growth for development. And so, all of you have probably picked the right profession to be in because it is about private enterprise. So when we came to look at our social endeavors, we said to ourselves, we've got to embrace private sector. We've got to embrace private enterprise because that's the only way in which we are going to be able to actually mobilize the resources and achieve the sort of goals that we have set out for ourselves. So we've got 4 types of social endeavor that we have out there. Large scale, which is like the power station. The photograph that you see there is the Azisto power station. The boxes correspond with the pictures. Is there a way I can do this? No, I can't do that. So the large scale is sort of the power station, and that's the Azisto power station in Côte d'Ivoire in Abidjan. Then we have many small scale social endeavors, and like the sort of group of women that you see there doing microfinance, it's a Grameen Bank type of approach where women come together and have their savings utilized as providing loans, small loans to their members. There is less or no revenue generated there, and the scale is small. Then we have the large scale where there is no or little revenue, which are the hospitals. And there you see the Aga Khan University Hospital in Karachi, which is large scale, large operation, but small revenue generation possibilities. And then finally, you have small scale, but the potential to generate revenue is quite large because you've got agriculture and base of the pyramid types of interventions where agriculture processing and agriculture productivity can be improved so that you can get that a lot of revenue generated to that. Now, with these 4 social development endeavors that we have, and they're an example of the sort of things that we do, but the Aga Khan Network projects or initiatives can be actually put into one of those 4 boxes quite neatly. And then we've asked ourselves, okay, if these are the social endeavors that we are trying to apply, what is the investment type that would make most sense for each of these social endeavors? So the blue one, the large-scale power station, big hotel, chain of hotels, or banking, like the Diamond Trust Bank in Kenya, those are what we categorize as global commercial investment. We feel that those probably don't need any help from development practitioners. They can go to the IFCs, they can go to the Barclays banks, get the investment and get that done quite well. It's the other 3 boxes that we feel compelled of opportunity for impact investment. When we got large-scale programs like our hospital in Karachi, we believe that there's an opportunity for blended finance, What that means is that we can introduce, and we can use grant financing in clever ways to leverage softer lending from the likes of the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, OPIC. And with them, based out in DC, a good organization, by the way, to work for, excellent reputation, and an excellent president in Elizabeth Littlefield. We worked with them recently to agree a deal for $37 million for expansion of health services in Pakistan. And the only way we were able to do that was because of the cross-subsidization from the wealthy patients in the hospital, paying more than those mothers who cannot get childcare or maternal care without having access to this type of facility. And I'll speak a little bit more about that later on. In the small-scale projects where we don't have sufficient revenues being generated, and a lot of it is like women's empowerment projects or housing for the ultra-poor, or humanitarian assistance sometimes. We are looking at a concept called asset building. And what we are saying there is that there are opportunities that we have that you can build assets for the community, whether it's, the most traditional form of asset building is an endowment through generous contributions by rich people in the community. But you can also give poor people the ability to process some of their rice, or the ability to handcraft use their skills to do handicraft. Whatever it is, you need to find that asset that you can establish within that community so that that asset becomes the proxy for lack of revenue generation taking place. But again, there's a business acumen that's required. There's an impact investment that's needed in order to be able to make that activity sustainable, make that social endeavor last. And then finally, the most exciting part is the green box, which I think has got the huge potential. It's when you appreciate that actually for poor people's livelihoods, if we can connect them better to markets, if we can increase their agricultural productivity, if we can get them to understand what the best prices are for the crops that they are growing, if we can negotiate for them through new technology, lots of good examples of mobile telephones allowing the farmer to know exactly what the price is for his milk, so he doesn't get ripped off by the gentleman who is collecting the milk from his farm gate. Those sorts of things, huge potential there, and the Aga Khan Development Network is doing quite a lot of work on that, including trying to now establish some local funds, and I'll speak to that a little bit later. So I won't go into the details of the next slides. I've spoken about it. This is basically explaining to you what I just explained, which is how do we do the large-scale work. There are some examples at the bottom of the screen there. Pamir Energy, Serena Hotels, the Nation Media Group, the Kyrgyz Investment and Credit Bank, the power station in Cote d'Ivoire. These are the sorts of projects that probably will not need for very much longer any soft money. Then you've got the blended finance approach, which is the big hospitals that will need to happen. We do see in Africa and Asia a ticking time bomb of, excuse me, that should not go off. I've obviously said something I shouldn't be saying, huh? We do see that non-communicable diseases in Africa and Asia are a ticking time bomb. The infrastructure, if we are worried about healthcare in this country, and I know all of you are considerably absorbed by that debate, in Africa and Asia, the numbers of hospitals are few and far in between. I haven't got a statistic readily in my mind, but so the building of hospitals, the building of infrastructure for healthcare is going to be extremely important. How are you going to do that? And we think that this blended finance approach makes a lot of sense. And then, there's an interesting little project there called the Nairobi City Park. Normally, if you want to create a park in an urban environment, you need a benefactor, you need a local government to provide resources and money for that to occur. And in this particular case, what we have done is we've got impact investors to come in, and we've created opportunities within the park for revenues to be generated. And I'd love to ask a question, but we don't have time, but let me move quickly. The most intriguing, the most fascinating revenue generating stream has been car parking. Nairobi City is growing. Nairobi City has a lot of need for car parking. The park now has plans to develop a car park, and the revenues generated by the car park make the use of the park free and will sustain the park, and will also generate revenues sufficient to be able to pay investors who have invested in creating the park. There's also generous contributions of grant by the government, by His Highness the Aga Khan, but that sort of thing begins to suggest to me that we have to think of different ways in which development, social development occurs, neither from charity nor from local government, but by the private sector. Sustaining social services, the small-scale asset building idea, very important, because there will always be a group of people at the base of the pyramid who will not be able to afford services for themselves. There'll always be that. How do we actually overcome that? In the context of governments which are not able or are so fragile are not be able to actually achieve that. So how do you build those assets? And then finally, the local investment area, where I think we have a huge potential. And now, if you haven't been listening to me so far, you might want to wake up now. At least one or two of you are sleeping away there. I can see one in the corner enjoying the morning snooze, which is acceptable, by the way. I bore my children to death all the time, and so I don't blame you. My children are about your age, by the way. But this is an important diagram, and this is my baby, and this is what I'm really proud of, and this is what I really get excited about, and this is my breakthrough. All the things I've been talking about, all these little boxes I've been showing you, are now in this diagram. And what we've done is we've got this partnership with the U.S. government for $60 million. There is something called the Global Development Alliance that U.S.A. does, where it says, if you give us 50%, we will give you 50%. So we've gone to them and we said, look, we're going to do this partnership with you for $60 million in Afghanistan. And this partnership would normally be about the green box. And in the green box are all the nice things we do in social development: health, education, governance, all those sorts of things. And so what we have always been worried about is that the green box is always time-bound, 5 years. And then the project ends, everybody goes home, everybody's happy that some teachers got trained, some schools got built, but you know what? Those teachers have left. The schools are still as bad at educating the children as they were before. So we wanted to create something of a way in which those things could be sustained into the longer term. And when we started asking that question, we said, well, those ideas of asset building, those ideas of impact investment, can we bring those to bear on this partnership? So we created the top line. We created an investment vehicle, a MEAD financing facility for $30 million that will then do investment projects in Afghanistan, in parts of Afghanistan. The first project, by the way, is going to be an almond processing plant. The most delicious almonds in the world, and if you're from California, watch out for the Afghan almonds. They taste better than Californian almonds. Are produced in Afghanistan, but they can't export them. So what we were trying to do is to just build this little plant there. And so, but that will improve people's livelihoods. People will get jobs. Farmers will get hopefully better prices for their almonds. We will work with farmers to improve the productivity of their trees and all that sort of thing. So wonderful development. But we've said to these impact investors, we care about Afghanistan. We love you to come and make some profit, but we're not going to give you all the profit. A portion of your profits will go into a trust fund. Those are the two purple or darker things at the end. And the trust fund will not kick in till year 6, 7, 8, or 9, because it's going to take time to set up the almond plant. It's going to take time to become profitable. All those wonderful things that you in business know more than I do. But that trust fund will become perpetual. That's my real joy. You know, I talk with U.S.A. often, and they say, oh, when is it going to start? What's going to happen? I said, look, it's only been a year or two. Let's give it 10 years. But imagine how this changes the power relationships, the community's benefit, the community's ability. You've got a share of the profit of what is being done in your country, and that share of profit is really for you to determine how you're going to spend it. Because we come back to the green boxes, because development never finishes. Those teachers need retraining. Those children want to go to university from those communities. That healthcare needs to improve because they now want to diagnose for cancer, which wasn't a problem 10 years ago, or whatever. So we have created this dynamic model. And people say to me, this is a great breakthrough. I said, this is just a start. I want everybody to replicate this. I want everybody to improve upon this. I want you to look at it and rip it apart and change it and give me a better idea. Because that's what development is about. It's not about one idea and then sticking to it. It's taking an idea and improving it, right? That's the way I look at it. We have some future directions. We want to do some pooled capital investments. The sort of things I've been talking about. It is about cross-subsidization. It is about making profits in some places, but being generous in other places. We have the AKDN companies and institutions that can absorb the sort of investments that we can get. And then, of course, ultimately, it's about the beneficiaries. Ultimately, it's being... There is a tradition increasingly coming up in that we don't listen to poor people, and therefore we have to go out there and listen to them first and hear about their ideas and be responsive. And I love that. That's really fashionable, right? But that shouldn't stop you or me or anybody else to think, well, what can I do? How do I put things together, knowing what their needs are, and how do I innovate? So, I would encourage you to think like that and to do things like that. And I hope that this gives you a taste of what we are trying to do. Fundamentally, impact investment has to be driven by making money, right? There's no other secret out there. But the point about impact investment is, how do you measure the benefits that come out of that investment? How do you inculcate an ethic, a desire of generosity, of saying, yeah, I want to make money, but I also want to do good. And how do I share that good? And how do I count that good? How do I measure that good? And I know the bright ones amongst you must be thinking, well, how does he measure that? And I hope that you will ask me that question when we come to question time. These are just some of the deals that we've done. I've spoken about most of them, so I won't labor it too much at the moment. But I will answer questions should you have any. But let me come back to the 3 questions that I posed, and that you were all very pessimistic about. I do think my own view is that unless we do things like this, unless we embrace impact investment, the world will definitely be a less safer place. And it's related to the equity question. The gap between the haves and the have-nots is growing, tremendously growing. And clearly all of you appreciate that, because none of you think that that's actually going to get any smaller, or that the world will become more and more equitable place in 10 years' time. And I, unfortunately, am in that camp, that it won't be a safer place, that it won't be a more equitable place in 10 years' time. And that the only way in which we can try and address that is through these forms of impact investment. It is about private sector. It is about, when I started my career, I used to hate the idea of making money. And so I joined the British government, and I was an economist there, and all the sort of things that Jeff talked about in my career. But I'm an economist by training, so I do know money matters. And now the question is, how do you distribute it? And thank goodness for your wonderful country here, which actually has philanthropists like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and others who want to give away their money, which is a tremendous thing that they've started. So I'll stop there and take some questions, but I hope this was reasonably interesting. And I know you all need to get your credits, and you've all got your little tickets, but at least some of you might have appreciated some of what I'm saying. But I'm interested in your questions as well. So thank you very much.
Questions, and we have microphones here, so just raise your hand. We have one up there.
Hello. So quick question. You mentioned that you all do a lot of business in Africa and Asia, specifically in countries that are failing or are actually failed, in the case of Syria. So I'm just kind of wondering, how do you effectuate that, especially with community building in a time of war or a time of instability?
Yeah, good question. I mean, clearly, business can only happen when there's peace. So in situations where there's war, all-out war, civil war type of conditions, as is the case in Syria, as was the case in Tajikistan, as was the case in Uganda, we will not operate when there's, the safety of our staff is obviously of paramount importance. But what we will not do either at times of conflict is to abandon the community. There's a very interesting story in Côte d'Ivoire. As you know, that country had a civil war, north and south. And what the communities in the north tell us is that your rice processing plant continued throughout the difficult periods. You continued to pay salaries. You kept us alive. And so there was, but what's more is, they say, is that you allowed us to keep our dignity during times of hardship. It would have been very easy for us to close down those rice processing plants and just go away. But there was a very conscious attempt to ensure that we kept going as long as we could. And in that particular country, we stayed throughout the difficult years and negotiated with different factions to say, look, do you want us to do this or not? And I think even parties in conflict recognize value of life, recognize when you're doing good work and you're a permanent player in that country, which is another nature of the Aga Khan Development Network. We stay. And people, governments, individuals know we stay. And so we are able to negotiate with even different factions an ability to sustain some activity. Obviously, you can't do everything, but it's an important characteristic of the Aga Khan network that we don't run away easy. And we're doing similar sort of things in Syria at the moment, as long as we can. But it's not easy. Right? If you don't ask too many questions, I have questions for you.
Actually, I have two questions. First is, when you consider potential investment opportunities, how you evaluate its possibility to be profitable? And the follow-up one is, how do you do the due diligence for these potential projects? Thank you.
Very good questions. I thought your second question is going to be, how do you measure? How do we actually select an investment proposition? In this business, in the impact investment area, they must make a profit. There's no two ways about it. The business must make profit, whatever the idea it is. You can make profits by costs being low and revenue being high, or cost being low and revenue being low, or cost being high and revenue being high. And so we look at both sides of the equation. And that's why I think getting soft money, because it's a cost to business, is so important. The second area, and in order to get that soft money, is to be able to demonstrate that this project will not only make money, but it'll improve social good. It'll do something that's worthwhile. It'll protect the environment because it's solar power or something. It will improve maternal child care because half the population that receives benefits will be for free. It will improve girl-child education. You know, something like that has to motivate an impact investment. Otherwise, things go into the blue box, if you remember my pictures, which is, yeah, if you want to make money, you want to go to Africa, you want to build a factory, and you want to make money, well, that's fine. Go to the blue box, we wish you well. But there are other boxes that we want to play in, which then means, and the due diligence is more or less like you would do for any other business, right? Look, you do your cost-benefit analysis, you do your spreadsheets, you try and look at internal rates of return, and then you look at social rates of return. The other important thing is, how do you measure improvements? And I find that in financial sector, it's very easy. If I say to you, that project will have 15% rate of return, you get it. If I say to you, that project there will train 1,000 nurses, and that project there will improve the healthcare of 200 kids, how do you compare them? Which is more important? And this is the area which is so fundamentally cutting edge at the moment. There are ways in which you can calculate that, but it becomes a bit of a value-laden question. But I think that's where the brightest people have to put their minds to. How do you create the right indicator, and how do you measure that indicator? Very often what we do is we fall into the output side of indicators rather than the impact side, although we call it impact investment. So it's easy to say, well, that project will provide schools for 1,000 girls, and we will count the number of girls who go to school. And we've ticked that, we've got that result. But what did those girls actually do in society after they got the education? What happened to the country's potential for growth because of mother's education? What happened to the family's income because the mother was better educated? So the girl got her education, she becomes a mother. Research, evidence suggests that she's going to be much more powerful influencer of the children's care and children's own education. So how do you count for that impact from that project? So, but it's a struggle. But what I say about impact investment with all my colleagues who get excited about it is, look, the most fundamental thing is that you've got to show me profit. How are we going to make profit? And once you do that, then you can start talking about how the profit should be shared, etc.
Thanks.
What projects do you have in the United States? What is your role here?
We have three functions in this country. One is resource mobilization. The other one is policy dialogue, influence, advocacy. And the third is public education. We don't have any projects per se in the United States. The reason for that is we think that your country is already extremely well endowed with civil society organizations that support a whole range of things from affordable housing to childcare to violence against women, and social housing. There's just so many people doing such great work that we feel that, our marginal support would probably not make that much of a difference. We have credibility, knowledge, years of experience, history in Africa and Asia. So whatever resources we have, we would like to apply there. But I'm full of admiration of the civil society in this country that does magnificent work for poor, underprivileged people. And I learn a lot from that. I mean, one of the reasons why we're here is not only mobilize financial resources, but intellectual resources, ideas, thoughts. And that's why I like coming to universities, because I think this is a place where new ideas are generated and research is done, and we can learn from it. Yeah. Very good question. Do you want to repeat it, or maybe the microphone so everybody else can hear it?
How is climate change impacting your investment strategy?
Yeah. I mean, the agriculture processing plants are going to be the hardest hit. We've got an operation in Kenya called Frigoken that helps small farmers grow green beans, which are then canned and exported to France. It's a profitable business. Everybody in that value chain is benefiting. But the water resources that the farmers have are much more erratic than they used to be. So we are looking at ways in which we can help them conserve water and to use it more efficiently. So that it's a much more of a coping strategy. And our view is that we can't influence the science of climate change. We think it's here. We think it's happening. And so our focus is very much to work with communities to help them adapt to changes. But it's going to bring on all sorts of different stresses. The other year I was in Kenya, and the number of cattle that had come into the city, the Maasai, whose homeland is Nairobi is built on, just said, well, no, our cattle need grass, and we're going to bring them into the city because there's no grass left out there. So it's going to create, and that's just a little snippet, a little window into the sort of conflict that could come about. You're hearing about it quite a lot in California right now. So it's right there on the doorstep. At the same time, the other thing that's happening related to that is that there is urbanization taking place. And so some of our thinkers are looking at the notion of urban farming and trying to sort of reduce carbon emissions, because you grow a tomato in 10,000 miles away and you bring it to the consumer. That really does sound a bit crazy. So we're looking at those sorts of things, but unfortunately it's here to stay. The other thing that's happening with climate change, which is creating uncertainty in our programming, is that countries like Pakistan are becoming more prone to natural disasters. Landslides, floods, are much more regular. Drought, of course, has a major impact. It's just basically trying to cope and build those assets that we talked about earlier so that when the tragedy happens, when things don't go right, there's something to fall back on. Yeah, we're looking at, just finally, we're looking at some insurance, climate insurance pilots, whereby it's another way of building an asset or some support. So when a crop fails, the farmer is given some insurance payout. I know in America it happens all the time when you have a very sophisticated way of doing it. But in Africa and Asia, we're trying to introduce some ways of doing it. Because the thing is that there is disaster fatigue, and the level of resources in the world to respond are diminishing. So we have to find alternative ways, and so impact investment could be one way of encouraging insurance companies for profit to insure farmers who would otherwise not get that insurance. And so that's what we're looking at.
Thank you for being with us, Mr. Jahani, this morning. My question is, you mentioned you worked in Tajikistan, you have a presence there. So the question was, this is the post-Soviet, post-communist country. How was it working in a post-communist country? Was it different from the rest of the world? And how was the impact investment was different in that region? Thank you.
Yeah. If you ask me the question, what's been one of the highlights of your career, I would have said my work in Tajikistan, because I'm very proud of the fact that in the space of about a decade between 1992 and 2002, a 10-year window after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and 2002, the Aga Khan Development Network went into Tajikistan, supported the humanitarian crisis. The Soviet Union collapsed, subsidies ended, people had no food, and winter was coming. So we went and supported with the food distribution, etc. But we knew, as is clear from our philosophy, that people cannot have dependency on outside aid. They have to do things for themselves. So the first thing that we introduced with the government, working closely with them, was a notion of privatizing land. All Soviet land was part of Koskov's state farms, and so there was no private land. So we introduced the notion of private land, and of course, when you privatize land, people care for it more because it belongs to them. People then make it more productive. We support it with agricultural development, irrigation, and agriculture yields increased. People became more self-sufficient. And then the notion of, a market. So I can have chickens, and you mean to say I can have eggs and I can actually sell them in a market? It was a fascinating little anecdote. You talk to households who you would introduce a little poultry project and you give them chickens, and you said the eggs you can actually eat, but you can also sell. And it's bizarre. People would not want to sell their eggs. The concept of selling was, and of course, so the first time we created a small market in small towns, and then the first time we went to the market, there was no one there, or people would give things away to each other. They just didn't know this concept but within 12, 14, 16 months, they'd picked it up. They become entrepreneurial. They knew the prices. They knew how to negotiate. That's how we started. I think it's all about dialogue, conversation, improving. And then, of course, the likes of the World Bank, IMF, and others were helping the government set up, sector reforms of all different types. And now I was in Dushanbe 4 or 5 weeks ago, and it's a totally transformed place from those years of near civil war and collapse of the Soviet Union, which also allows me to be the optimist that I am, that when you see something like that, when a state has failed completely and it becomes a legitimate state with all the sort of warts all over it, It's not a democratic government. It's quite oppressive and all of those sorts of things. But nonetheless, you've got something that is represented at UN and has huge potential. Are you from that part of the world? Where are you from?
Uzbekistan,
Ah,
which
very
is
good.
another post-Soviet country. It's
Yes,
borders
yes.
with Tajikistan.
Yes, yes. I love Samarkand. I love Bukhara. If I could spend more time there, I would love to stay there. Those of you who have never heard of these names, look them up. Those of you who have, go and see this. Samarkand is something beautiful. So, thank you for the question.
I'll ask one during the pause. I'll ask. I want to go back to your three original questions. If I heard you correctly, you said that you were answering your own questions, seeing more inequality in the world. We know that China, India are developing a lot of that growth, which potentially can have a large impact on African economies, might lead to what I perceive as economists, more equality, perhaps, around the world. Maybe you could speak to that. And the second part is I never heard the answer on the interest.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Jeff. I think maybe we will look at equality in different ways going forward. I like your question about India and China particularly, because actually numbers of people under a poverty line has reduced. So people have lifted out of poverty. So abject poverty is declining. And one of the World Bank's goals is to eliminate abject poverty, which I think is possible. So that's a blessing. And that could well happen within 10 years if we really put our mind to it. This year, by the way, the Strategic Development Goals are going to be announced in September, SDGs. There used to be something called Millennium Development Goals that have now coming to an end. So the SDGs for the next 15 odd years my view is will definitely have an objective that says abject poverty has to be eliminated. And we should have that. And I think it's impossible to think that mankind or humankind can't actually do that today. But what will happen is those people who come into that next, who are not so poor, will still be far, far away from those who are very, very rich. And I mean, middle-income countries are the scourge of this problem because there are so many people who become so wealthy at sometimes the expense of those who are not so wealthy. And that's where I think that there will be an expansion of the inequality gap. And I see that in India. More and more middle classes in India, but still a huge population that's very, very poor. On interest rates, my wish is they stay low because it's created a momentum behind impact investment like never before. Because, when I speak to American investors and I say, well, you could get 5%, and they're up for it. Because 5% compared to 0.05% in my bank, here's my $1,000, please buy me something. And then 5% for Africa is really absolutely useful money because growth can be a lot higher in that economy. So I've seen the interest rate dynamic actually working for a lot of impact investment. A lot of flows will go as long as they stay low. And I would like to think that we might be in a period, at least in the next 10 years, we could be in a period of low interest rates. People are now talking about deflation, right? I mean, the Swiss issued a bond which was negative interest rates. So can you imagine? You buy a bond for $100 and in 5 years or in 6 months they give you 99? Ooh, what will that do for us? You mean to say I give you money and you give me less after 5 years? That's going to create a whole new dynamic. And so in that scenario, you can go to the same Swiss person and say, well, if you give me money for Kenya, I'll give you 3%. And if you can guarantee that in some fashion, oh, gosh, it'll be a powerful mechanism for changing the dynamic and therefore helping us with the inequality and all of that. Yeah, but that's my, I can't give you a perfect answer. Well, I would like to give an advertisement, if I may. I don't know how, we're probably running over time. The Aga Khan Foundation USA runs a fellowship program. It's a 2-year fellowship program. It means you spend a year with us in DC, and then you go for a year outside to one of our other offices, Nairobi, Dushanbe, or Delhi, or wherever it might be. And the 2-year fellowship program is fully funded. You know, we pay well, we look after you well. And then the idea is that if you like us and we like you, you become part of our management structure after that period. So the program has closed for this year, so the advert is really for next year's cohorts. But I would love to see some applications from your university. So I thought I'd mention it. It's all online nowadays, so people can find out about it. But, yeah.